Good evening all and welcome. I would like to wish you all a very happy holiday season and hope you all have a wonderful few days. This year, I have the pleasure of inviting back the amazing Killer Orange Cat for another collection of Christmas horror stories. He's narrating some of mine and I will be narrating some of his. So when you finish up here, please go over to his channel. He is a wonderful person and has an amazing set of stories over there. Check him out and our video together. I'm sure you will love it. But before we start, I need to warn you. The first story is particularly dark. You have been warned. So with that being said, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This is actually my mum's story and will be told from her personal account. It was early December of 2005. My brother Alex and his wife's fourth child had just started first grade. So with her having full days off school, they had more time to pick up some extra hours and try and get ready for Christmas. All he could find at the time is work with companies, where he would drive a work truck to different counties in our state, making deliveries between businesses that weren't worth getting a big semi-truck for. After the big snowstorm we had in '99 that trapped us at home for weeks, none of us liked the idea of him being on the road. But you know, your uncle. He couldn't stand the idea of having nothing under the tree on Christmas. I didn't even want to go with him. When he asked me, I had the worst feeling about it, but the weather channels all said the storm wouldn't last, and I was the only one of us that had a cell phone. So I couldn't just let him go out there alone. If something happened and he froze to death because he couldn't call for help, I don't know if I would be able to live with myself. So I dropped off my son at my aunt's house and told his father that I'd be back in a few days. That was it. That was the start of it all. A route he'd done 100 times up to that point. But the Weather Channel was wrong. By the time we were nearing the Vermont border, all of those mountains came up. Every single one of them didn't have a speck of color on them, and everything around us was white. There were points where all we could do was follow the tire tracks on the road from vehicles in front of us and hope they didn't go off the road for us to follow. We were starting to lose the light by the time we were closing in on Burlington, Vermont, and we figured that would be as good a place as any to spend the night. I hate cities, but driving those roads in the dark wasn't an option. We only had to travel through the back way to Montpelier, and then it was smooth sailing on the interstate right into Burlington. In the morning, we could reassess our route and cut through to New Hampshire, and from there towards the city. I remember we filled up at a gas station, and it was so cold that when we brought our coffees to the van, it didn't even burn our mouths to drink it. Nothing but ice out there, but we were sure we could make it to the interstate, and then the roads would be clear. So we kept going, even though we felt off about it. We were talking about what we were getting the kids for Christmas, and where we'd be getting together to have Christmas dinner that year, when we hit the mountain. I said to him, "We should turn around and go back. This isn't safe." For a minute I thought he'd listen, but then he shifted the gear on the van and said, "Go back to what?" He was right. We hadn't seen anything since we got our coffees, and they were stone cold by then. It was actually okay for a while. We were following another car stuck behind a plow, so the safest place to be at that time was there, or so we thought. This next part is a bit hazy for me. We saw the snowplow jerk towards the edge of the mountainside, and we were so afraid of him going through the bars and off the side of the mountain. I didn't even consider what he was jerking away until I heard Alex yell. I was watching the snowplow try to right itself and keep itself on the road, and I didn't even have time to look out the windshield to see what he was yelling about before the car in front of us hit us. When everything stopped moving, my coffee was everywhere, all over me, the windshield, my phone, everything. My chest was on fire, and my legs felt like they'd been hit by a car. I checked my phone, first thing, but no good. It was gone. So much for calling for help. The next thing I checked was my brother. His mouth was bleeding and his eyes were closed, but when I said his name and shook him, he groaned. So at least I knew he was alive. All I could see in front of us was ice and rock. So I had no idea what the other drivers' states were, but I had to get a phone to get help. So I told him to stay put and left the car. Of course, he didn't listen to me because he never does, so before I could even register what I was looking at, he was behind me calling my name and telling me not to leave him. In front of us was this large work truck, and flat as a pancake right in front of it was the car in front of us. I couldn't move. They had to be dead. No one could have survived that. But Alex ran the best he could, holding his chest and stumbling around the car to pry open the passenger door to the truck. I finally got out of my daze when he told me to stay away from the truck, and my heart sank. Was everyone dead? Were we the only ones who survived? That day I realized that hell wasn't a place. Being all alone on that mountain surrounded by metal, rocks, freezing winter cold ice and dead bodies, with no way to get help for miles from anyone or anything. That was the worst feeling I've ever experienced. There was another vehicle that wasn't there though, someone who might be alive. The snowplow was gone. There was a big dent in the guardrail and we couldn't see him. So he left us to go get help. What else could we think? No one that's not pure evil could see what we saw and not stay to help, unless they knew they needed to get the police. I was about to mention the snowplow when he finally got the door open, only to find himself up to his ankles in trash. He didn't hesitate though. He was going for the radio and climbed onto the truck where I couldn't see him. I panicked. Even him just being out of sight, I couldn't stand being alone up there, so I ran to the truck despite knowing what I'd find, but I had to stop before I got to the door. I smelled it. It was like a brewery mixed with pennies. I know that smell. Enough alcoholics are in our family to know it. Alex cursed and tumbled back out the truck, and I went to help him, trying to ignore the fresh blood on his clothes and the even stronger smell of alcohol and blood filling my nose coming from the now open door. Radio's dead. Thing won't even start. He snarled, gripping his chest again. I started to tell him my thoughts on the plow when we heard a horrible scream that made both of us flinch from the panic behind it. I practically dropped Alex on the ground, racing back around the front of the truck to the car to see inside was a young girl. She was beautiful. Brown hair with blonde highlights, a Lilo and Stitch t-shirt and the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen that were filled with tears and terror. She was confused and screaming, in between words reaching out to me, and I grabbed her hand. Alex, in a rush to get me and to get me away from the scene, crashed into me, and she cried out when my hands were pulled from hers. But I was right back to the window within seconds, pushing him off me. "We'll get you out, honey," I promised. I turned on Alex as he tugged on me again. He had to have some sort of idea, right? He could get her. One door was already pried open. We could do it. But his eyes were gigantic when he looked at me, and he wouldn't say a word. Coming from a guy who has never shut up since the day he was born, I met his eyes. Then followed where he led my gaze to, and a fresh set of tears sprung on me all over again. Right underneath the feet of the stitch on her shirt and the bit of her stomach that was showing, with how she was sitting there was only solid metal. The rest of her couldn't even be seen. She didn't seem to understand what happened to make me react that way, and began panicking when she followed our eyes, realizing what we did. She began panicking all over again, begging us to tell her where our legs were, so I shushed her, holding her hand tight and promising her that she would be okay, that help was coming and they'd get her out. I don't know how long I stood there. Alex eventually went back to the truck, and in the mostly undamaged back of ours to see if there was anything to help fight off the cold while we waited, but there wasn't much. He even searched the area around the trash that fell out of the drunk man's truck, but no luck there either. I gave her my jacket. We put on every piece of clothing that we brought with us for the trip. She was getting cold though, and her voice getting weaker and more quiet. It was completely dark by then. All we could see was what the snow let us, and our flashlight that would run out of batteries eventually. Alex tried to convince me to get back to our vehicle, to get out of the wind, but I just couldn't leave her. When I looked into her eyes, all I could see was my own child, when they got to that age one day. She wasn't even 20 yet, trying to get home for Christmas. She told me about her family, about her college, and her life up to that point, and her arsehole boyfriend that was supposed to come but cancelled at the last minute to spend the holiday with his friends instead. She decided before that end that it was a good thing though. She said that he was a good man and that he didn't deserve to die like this too. She was much more calm by this point, not even acknowledging the fact that she was practically in half. I think deep down, she knew she wasn't going home and needed someone to listen to her as she tried to make sense of how this could be how her life came to an end. She kept mentioning how cold it was, but as soon as Alex noticed me removing my layers of clothing to give to her, he scolded me, demanding that I keep as bundled up as possible. He told me that she was already dead, and we're the ones who needed the warmth, not her. I knew he was right, but I cursed him anyway, shoving him away from her. Even if she too knew he was right, he didn't need to say that in front of her. She had even grown quiet after some time, each of us giving other assurances that everything would be okay, instead of the conversation of before. By the time I was struggling against the cold, even with Alex hugging me, trying to keep the wind off his back and from me, when we heard the sirens in the distance. My brother and I looked at each other and, without even saying anything or showing any emotions, he staggered and limped as fast as he could towards them, holding the flashlight over his head and waving it. He couldn't yell, without devolving into coughs and spitting up more blood, but gritting his teeth against the pain, hand on his chest. He waved the light all over the road towards the sirens, eventually seeing the lights of police, firefighters and ambulances. I told her that they were coming, and that they would help her, and that this was all over, but she didn't react. She gave me a sad smile, and it broke my heart into a million pieces. I knew that she knew by then that she wasn't going to make it, but seeing the acceptance mixed in with the fear on her face, and hearing how thankful she was that I was with her, and how lucky my daughter was to have me in her life, was more than I could take. I let go of her hand, and did what my brother couldn't. I stood and jumped, waving the flashlight over my head, screaming that we needed an ambulance over here, and that she needed help. They listened, and rushed over as fast as they could, but Alex was right. There was no helping her. She got to call her mother one last time on the EMT's phone, and tell her she loved her, along with some other messages to her other family. Then, they tried to get her out, and that was that. They took me away into the ambulance after they ensured her pulse had stopped. She was dead. The drunk guy was dead. My brother could be dying for all I knew, and none of it felt real. My brother and I were allowed to ride in an ambulance together. It was against protocol, but given what we had just went through and how devastated I was, they allowed it. I think Alex would have attacked them if they tried to separate him from me at that point. Regardless, he wasn't letting me out of his sight until we were in a building with heat and off that mountain. Once we got to the hospital, they took him away, and I was alone. I called my husband and told him where I was and the gist of what happened, and then I called my sister-in-law and told her even less of what happened, and that I would call her the second I heard anything about Alex, and that she had to wake my child up, since it was almost 3 a.m, but I had to hear their voice. Now it's 2021, and when it's cold outside, my skin burns as if it's being stabbed by heated needles. Alex had so much blood in his lung by the time they came that he still has problems with breathing. We both had broken ribs that healed, and the surgery I had to get later on with my legs went fine. It's 2021, and we're alive. We got to come home and have Christmas, and all the Christmases since, and I saw you grow up to be the age of that poor girl and then surpass her. I never went to her funeral or met her family. I've always regretted that. These days, I don't even remember her voice, her family's names. I don't remember what school she went to or where exactly her boyfriend went for Christmas instead of going home with her. I don't remember how her hands felt or the smell of her shampoo in her hair. Hell, most of the time it doesn't even feel like she was a real person, like it was just a horrible dream or something that happened to someone else. But that smile she gave me at the end, how she knew it was all over, but was too scared to actually say it. How one of her last acts was to reassure me that she knew she was going to die, and how it was going to all be okay. Just like that, I will never forget.
Christmas morning, I through the keyhole. So this happened to me when I was around 10 years old. This little story haunts me to this day, and I can still see it all happening in my head. First, I have to clear things up. In my country, we celebrate Christmas on the 24th in the evening and get there our presents. This happened on the same day in the morning. We live in a small house. It's not old or anything. My parents actually built it back in 1998. It's a 2-story house, and that Christmas, we had the tree in the upper room, my brother's room. This year, my father locked the room for obvious reasons, so no one could come in before Christmas Eve. No one but my parents. That morning, I was so excited for the presents, so I woke up early and the room was obviously still locked. Both my parents and my brother were asleep. I rushed over to wake them, but I didn't because I wanted to check if there were any presents under the tree already. To be clear, I saw them both still asleep this morning. Instead, I sneaked back to the room where the Christmas tree was and looked through the keyhole. I expected to see a lot of presents lying under the tree, but instead, I saw a big shadow, like something big was lying in front of the tree. I stared at it for a little while, when it suddenly begins to move. It was definitely not human. It looked like it jumped in the room and even got on the ceiling. You can actually see the tree, the window, and a little bit of the room. Then I saw it jump out of my vision, still in the room. A few seconds later, I saw an eye staring back at me through the keyhole. I was scared and jumped back, but didn't look again. My parents didn't believe me when I told them what had happened. I still don't know what it could have been, and I think I never will. I'm not sure about this part, but I thought I saw some wood in a square shape around the eye. I don't remember any color of the eye itself, but that's more because I'm a little colorblind. For reference, the thing I saw looked like what the channel Ghost of Carmel, Maine captured. Nuke's Top 5 should have a good clip of it. This was my first and last encounter with paranormal stuff.
This happened around 4 years ago on Christmas Day. I had spent the morning at my mother's house and then got in the car with my on and off boyfriend at the time. He was going to drop me off at the train station so that I could catch my train at 10 p.m. I had done this a few dozen times because I had actually gone to school across the Canadian border and travelled alone as a 19-year-old girl quite often. I'm pretty tough and extremely outspoken, so not the person you typically want to pick on for nefarious reasons. Although my ex was not very tough in stature and was often seen as an easy target. Here we are sitting in the car outside the train station, smoking my last bit of pot. I was a fairly reckless teen, but also aware of the bad that could happen. A man walks right up to the car and taps on the window. The man is rough looking, to say the least, and I assume was approaching his 50s. My ex carelessly rolls down his window all the way and asks what he needs. The man explains that his car had run out of gas and that he was in need of some help because he had no phone nor money. He said his wife was in the car and was pregnant, and that they just needed to get home. Now, living in the big city, you get used to people asking you for money. That's not what concerned me. When I really started to panic is after I had already given him all the cash I had on me, I think around $20. That's when he got really weird. He really wanted us to get out of the car and come and help him. My first thought was, how the hell do you think we're going to be able to help you? So I sternly spoke up and said, "We gave you money, now leave." Then he acted offended that I would be scared in this situation. He just kept insisting that we go over to his car where his wife was waiting. I was clear in my thoughts that under no circumstances would I do that. Now I was starting to get angry. As he started to spew off some nonsense about him being a war veteran and for us not to worry, he started saying some random ass numbers as if they would matter to us. He then proceeds to grab my ex's wrist and explain how he would break it in one move. At this point I said something to the effect of, "Leave us alone right now." He looked at me and stepped away. I then told my ex to move the car to the other side of the station as we called the cops. Nothing else really happened. I got on the train just fine and the cops never got back to us. But the more I think about that night, the more freaked out I get about what he really intended to achieve that night. So to the creepy aggressive man who nearly ruined my Christmas, I'm so glad I didn't go anywhere near your car.
Ghost of a murder victim. Most people here are probably aware of the story of Ed Gein. For those that aren't, he was a small-town handyman who confessed to murdering 2 women in addition to stealing numerous bodies from their graves. One of the women he murdered was the owner of the local hardware, where he shot and killed her. That building still stands today. My story happened 20 years ago. I live in the same town, and it was before Thanksgiving. I had already started decorating my place for Christmas, and I needed to replace some of the lights, so I just made a quick trip to the hardware store for a couple boxes. I knew the building was rumored to be haunted by the murdered woman, but I never put much stock in it. I was in the back area where they kept the Christmas decorations and was about to grab the lights when I heard someone saying something about antifreeze. I turned my head and saw a woman walking by with a massive gunshot wound in her head. She then suddenly disappeared. I just stood there in shock for a good minute. When I finally made my way to the front of the store to pay for the lights, the guy behind the counter took one look at my face and simply said, "You saw her, didn't you?"
This happened after work this past Christmas Eve. I work a later second shift from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., or until we're done. I should also mention that while the warehouse is in a nicer area a few blocks down, it gets sketchy at night. We got done around 2 a.m., and me and my one friend were the first out to the parking lot, and we're standing there talking while we're warming up our cars. We were talking for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and during that time I saw this small sedan drive by slowly, but didn't think much of it, because it was a little icy out and figured they were just being cautious. But then I saw it slowly come back down from the road, from west, and pulled in and parked in the parking lot across from us, which was strange because it was a welding shop parking lot, and no one is ever there past 10 p.m. besides the police doing speed traps. At that point, I pointed it out to my friend, and he said he noticed it as well and thought it was weird. Then this big dude got out of the car and walked across the street over to me and my friend, while the car he got out of drove off. He asked my friend for a smoke, and as he did that, I walked over to my car to start scraping it off, so he would hopefully just not talk to me. But as soon as I stepped back out of my car with wallet in hand so that I could see one of my cards to scrape the window, he called over to me. I didn't want to be rude even though something felt off about the situation, but I just said screw it. There are cameras watching me and the rest of the workers should be out within 10 minutes, so I'll be fine. I'm 6 foot, 180 pounds soaking wet, and the dude was a good bit bigger than me. I'm guessing he was 6'2" to 6'4" and a solid 250 plus. He was trying to make small talk with me, asking about what we do there, how it sucks we have to work on Christmas Eve, just random nonsense like that. But I got the feeling he was sizing me up. So even though I have extreme social anxiety and can usually barely make eye contact with people, I know I remembered my grandpa always telling me if I'm in a sketchy situation with someone to stand tall, chest out, and make direct eye contact the entire time. Essentially do whatever to make you look like you aren't scared or nervous. To make it look like you're more trouble than they can be bothered with. I saw him keep looking down towards my wallet, so I took a step back so that I could make sure I was in the view of the cameras. Then he said, "Hey man, do you think you could give me a ride to my house? It's just down the road. Ran out of gas at the store and need to go back to my house to get money." Now the grocery store he said his car ran out of gas at is about a mile down the road to the east, yet the dude came from the west. And also, if he needed a ride to his house in the west, why would he have just gotten one from someone who dropped him off, who came from that direction in the first place? I then remembered reading online somewhere that around the holidays people would do whatever they can to get someone to give them a ride, and then force them to take him back to their house and rob them. At this point I'm like, screw this dude's trying to rob me. So I walk back towards my car since I know I have a giant utility knife under the seat, and tell him I'm good and to please get off company property. And he was like, "Come on man, it's Christmas Eve," while looking visibly pissed. And I said, "Dude, that sucks. Get off the property." At this point I'm in my car and he can see me reaching under the seat, at which point he turns and walks away and disappears in the alley block. I then go over to my friend's car, tell him what happened, and he says the dude was trying to get him to give him money for smokes, and then he tried to get him to give him a ride to the ATM. 2 days later, a picture of the same guy is on the local police department's Facebook page asking for information on him because he was wanted in relation to a string of armed robberies that happened during Christmas week.
Stalker without a face. To start off, please forgive me for my poor grammar and whatnot. I am on my lunch break at work with my mobile. When I was about 17, I worked as a hostess in this restaurant and bar. If you've ever seen the movie Waiting, that's exactly what it was like working at that restaurant. My stepbrother was my manager, and one of the kitchen workers was my godfather's son. It's important to know that my godfather is my dad's best friend. We will get to that later. It was around Christmas time. We were having our Christmas party at our second location, and it started at 9 p.m. Everything that day was normal for me, but I noticed my mom was kind of acting weird. When it was time to leave, my mom kept trying to talk me out of going. I wasn't going to miss the party, no way. So before I leave, my mom asked me to call when I get there and called before I leave to head home, which was weird because she wasn't too strict with me. I get to the party and everything is fine until my godfather's son comes up to me and was telling me he was surprised I was there considering. I asked him what that meant, and he was surprised no one filled me in on what's going on. I come to find out that the day at the restaurant, some man who was rough-looking and had a teardrop tattoo under his eye came in, asking where I was. The staff then told him I didn't work that day and that they can't give out that kind of information. He proceeds to tell my stepbrother, the manager, that he is my long-lost father, that I have no idea about him, but he wants to surprise me. At this point, my godfather's son comes out and hears the conversation and tells the man that he knows my father. I even look like him. So after this, they get a little worried that the man had some other information, that the man had some other kind of bad intentions, and call my mother. I don't even know who that man could have been, but I know for a while I was getting random calls without hearing someone talking, just breathing, and I often would feel uncomfortable out alone. To this day, I wonder who that was and what they were planning.
Many years ago, my mum had gotten this Grinch doll for a Christmas decoration. Nothing about it was scary on its own, it was just kind of there. The problem with this doll was that every single night I would have a nightmare. In these nightmares there would be some strange story, just like any nightmare. The point I'm trying to get across is that in none of all the nightmares I had, none of them were the same, other than the fact the Grinch doll was always in them. The worst part of this for me was he always knew I was dreaming and would talk to me like I was dreaming. Also, he was never really the antagonist in any of my dreams, but he was always there. In some cases, he would help me get out of the dreams, and sometimes he would just sit there. But get this, whenever Christmas was over and my mum would take it down, the dreams would stop. This happened for a few Christmases. 2 years ago, I told my mum I really didn't like having it up, and she took it down as easy as that. Last Christmas, I was visiting my sister for the holiday period. At some point, I was playing with my nephew in his room when I noticed the doll on the floor. This is not strange at all, because my mother had a box that she would will with things we didn't need anymore, so she could give them away. Anyway, I remember having a dream again, and sure enough, he was there. Just the other day, my friend asked me if I believed in ghosts, and I said no. She was shocked and said, "Have you ever had a paranormal experience?" When I told her this story, she said I should ask my nephew if I can have it just to prove I'm right. How disgusting would it be if I asked for it back, and he told me he got rid of it for the same reason?
Santa Claus and his pride and joy. I work at a beauty store, and today an older man with a white beard came in. I greeted him and asked if there was anything I could help him with. He stuck his hand out and said, "Hi, I'm Santa Claus." I go to shake his hand as I laugh uncomfortably. As I try to pull my hand away, he stops shaking my hand and just holds it and proceeds to tell me about how he's popular in the next town over us as Santa Claus and how their local beauty store knows him well. He held my hand for a solid 2 minutes as he told me about his stories of being Saint Nick. He finally let me go after I tried pulling away several times, and then finally asked me where the colored hairspray was so he could make his beard appear whiter. After helping him, I took him to the register to ring him up, and as I tell him his total, he hands me a card with a picture of Santa Claus on it that says, "Happy Holidays" on it. I take it and say thank you. Then he pulls out another card, but keeps it face down. He then says, "Now this one is my pride and joy. When I give this to you, I want you to keep it for yourself and not show anyone. Not your husband or your boyfriend. Nobody." And I was so uncomfortable that all I wanted was for this man to leave the store. He made me promise I wouldn't show another soul, which made me even more uncomfortable. I quickly turned the card over and glanced at it, thankful that it was just a picture of a wax bottle that said Pride, and a dish cleaning bottle that said Joy. The jokes seemed like innocent dad jokes, until what he said next. He then proceeded to ask me how long I've been working there, what days I work, and what my hours were. I just answered by saying I'm not sure, over and over again, since I find those things to be personal information. He then asked me how many other girls work at the store. I told him I didn't know. As I told him his total for the third time, he finally hands me his money. As I give him his receipt and his items, he then asks me if I'm married. I tell him no, but I do have a boyfriend. He says to me, "You should just stay single. That way, you'd be able to please every man." I look at him with disgust and tell him, "Okay, sir, you have a nice day." And then he looks at me in the eyes and says to me, "You stay safe out there. I'm serious," and then walks out the door. Dear Mr. Santa Claus, the only person I need to stay safe from is you. Let's not meet again.
I live in a different country to my family, and because of COVID, they were at their homes in our country. As a result, opening gifts took all day, because everyone was in a different house in a different time zone. It's fine, but opening Christmas gifts does go on all day some years. So this year I finally get to open my last gift at around 9 p.m. my time. I was online with my two sisters who were 7 hours behind me, and then I realized that I had one gift left that had no name on the tag. It had come from Amazon weeks earlier, and it was in one of their gift bags. My sister assured me that it wasn't her, so I opened it with her on the line. I opened it and was surprised to see a set of knives. I had this on my wish list, so it was a nice surprise, but I still had no idea who it came from. As I hang up with my sister, my other sister started FaceTiming her, so I asked her to check whether she'd sent the gift, but we'd missed it in the chaos. My other sister has 4 kids, so it's bedlam, when we're opening gifts together at her house. My other sister confirms to my other sister that no, she didn't send them, so both sisters say they didn't send it. I believe both of them, no questions asked. I know that my brother is at my parents' house, so I message him to double check that neither he nor my parents sent them, and it was missed in our earlier conversation. He confirms that it definitely wasn't him either. That basically leaves my significant other, a friend here in the UK, and a friend in Canada because of COVID. All of them say no, that they didn't order it, so I turn back the gift and check when it was sent. The first week of December, the 5th. I ask Amazon if they can tell me who sent it so I can thank them, and as expected, data protection laws say they can't tell me who did. I check the tag and realize it's been overwritten. This is the bit that's a little creepy / sinister. The default Amazon gift card greeting is the quite jovial, "Enjoy your gift," but this tag had been overwritten to all caps. "Enjoy your gift," in all caps, which is slightly more menacing considering this is a knife block set of 5 kitchen knives. So basically, I got a set of knives with a slightly but definitely menacing message from someone who must know me. It can't be accidental. It would take going on my wish list, selecting the gift, ticking for gift wrapping, changing the text, reviewing the order, placing it and paying. There's no way this is accidental. the only person I can think of is a person who I was friends with for over a decade. She became quite anti-vax and very abrasive, and I called her out on it. She didn't take it well, and we effectively ended the friendship about a week before the knives were sent. She knew I had the wish list. Money isn't a huge issue for her, so spending £40 on a knife block wouldn't be problematic. I don't want to ask her. The last 2 times we spoke, she tried to get me to argue for 2 days. I would just really like to know who and why. Because of the nature of the present, it's a little bit sinister, don't you think?
Mystery figure on Christmas. When I was 8 or 9, I saw something weird on Christmas Eve. This was many, many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still believed in Santa Claus then, as a good amount of children do, and I had the usual anxiety and excitement for Santa to leave Christmas presents by the tree. After I went to bed, I had some trouble getting to sleep with holiday nerves and such. I had finally drifted off when I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps somewhere in my room. I automatically assumed it was Santa Claus, and I was scared to see him for fear he might leave or his magic will fail. I opened one eye just barely and saw this black figure standing over my bed, staring at me. It was tall, probably around 6 feet tall, and it was completely dark. It looked almost blacker than black in a way. I couldn't see any eyes, mouth, or a nose on it, but I could clearly see the outline of a head, arms, body, and legs. It looked like a bigger person, so thinking it was Santa made sense. It stayed in one spot for 10, maybe 15 seconds, until it took a few steps closer. I leaned in a little more, still a few feet away from me, and then stayed there for 10-15 seconds more. Even though I couldn't see a face, I knew it was looking right at me. It's just that weird feeling you get when you know you're being watched or looked at. I closed my eyes again and waited for a few minutes. When I looked back, it was gone. I lived in a pretty old house at the time, so the doors and floorboards were squeaky and loud. I heard the footsteps, but I never heard the door open. I never saw this figure again, though I've had some other spooky experiences in this house. I asked my mom if she heard Santa when he came into my room last night, and she looked confused for a second. Then she played along and just assumed I was lying. I know this wasn't a person, and I know this wasn't a dream. I also know that spirits or entities are often attracted to lots of excitement and energy. So Christmas is a perfect time for a ghost to pass through.
Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. Happy festivities again to each and every one of you. I hope that you have had a truly wonderful day or set of days. Just general holiday. I'd like to remind you that I have more stories over on Killer Orange Cat's channel, which you can click on screen now or in the description to check out. It would really mean a lot. I love Killer Orange Cat, and I think you will too. But that's how I end today's video. Hopefully see you over there. Stay awesome. Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the next one.